Hello, everybody. I want to welcome all of the Roosevelt community and everybody farther and wide from the Roosevelt community who's logged in today. We are in for a really special treat. We have some really great guests who bring such a wealth of experience. Each sort of overlaps, but and they're both activists, which is even better in my opinion. I want to introduce myself first. I'm Dr. LaVon Downey. I'm a professor at Roosevelt. I do tons of advocacy for global health. The United Nations, UNA, One.org, all those organizations. So I am very active in the political process. One of the things I want to start with is sort of idea of what democracy is. And I think some of us think democracy and voting is like a one and done kind of thing. And it's actually an ongoing process and it's really never done per se. That's good because we can course correct. So we always have a chance every 2 years to change a system. It doesn't turn out the way we want every time. That's not always a bad thing, although it might feel like a really bad thing a lot of the time, but I want to give you a little idea about this. 2016, a lot of us didn't get what we wanted. And that spurred a lot of people who weren't in politics per se to action. And you might know some of their names or their initials, AOC, Underwood. These are all representatives, by the way. Representative Underwood, Omar, Presley, Tlaib, Cordon, and Davids. They made up the highest number of women running and winning for office in 2018. So they spurred a movement. They decided to go into politics and only a few of them were lawyers. Some of them were nurses, some of them were community activists. So it wasn't like they were on that upward trajectory to be in politics, right? But they said, you know what? This didn't turn out how I wanted. I'm going to be part of the change. I'm going to be part of the system. And that meant we had 117 women in the House and the Senate, which is the most ever. And we had 37 new members, okay? So you can change the system by being part of the system and being engaged in the system. And out of those numbers, we had 45 women of color who ran and won. So no one is excluded. You don't need a special trajectory to get there. You just have to believe in democracy, see your role as a course correction if you don't get what you want, and be engaged. But again, it's a continual process and it's never done, okay? And I'm sure you're gonna hear that from both of our guests who have got a storied and wonderful career about education and change. The first guest is Catherine Macadis, the Greek sounding one. Sorry about that, Catherine. She's the Executive Vice President of the League of Women Voters. She has the leader of the League Southside unit. She's been an organizer. She's done very active voter registration, voter services. She's done numbers of forums to educate people because that's one of the things people say, I don't know when I should vote. I don't know anything about it, right? And there are many ways to understand and get that information. Our second person is Professor Bethany Barrett. Some of you know because you've taken classes with her. She's a colleague of mine. She's the director of the Joseph, I always say this wrong, Laundry.
Loundy. There's not an R, it's Loundy. Yeah, you're good.
Human Rights Project. She has been a community partnership for change in the environment and human rights and prison reform. I remember way back when I first met her, she was doing that kind of stuff. She's written lots of books and done lots of articles on it. She's also part of the change, not just here, but in other global partnerships. So as you can see, long and storied career for both of them, activists for both of them. I do want to give a shout out to all my students who were in my public health class because the United Nations just sent me an email saying that they saw a surge of people reaching out to their congressperson and their senators. And they really, really admire that our students are getting involved in trying to get immunizations for everybody, no matter where they live, including the COVID-19 vaccine when it does come to fruition. So our students and our participants all have a role in change. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn it over to Catherine, and she's going to give you some sort of here's how you do it information. And then we're going to sort of talk about women and social justice with Professor Barrett also. So take it, Catherine.
Great. I'm going to share my screen so that we can go through this quickly so we can get to as much good stuff today as possible. Okay, everybody see that okay? It's centered properly? Good, excellent. All right, and before I start, I am going to paste a whole lot of URLs into chat. All right. So you see there's this big long list. And I know that some people might come late. So remind me at the end, because if you come late, you can't get to the earlier chat. Remind me when I finish to repaste it again into chat. Okay. Okay. All right. So, oh my God, it's November 2nd. It's finally here. We're all on pins and needles. I have scaled this down. This is a November 2nd, all the information you need. This is not going to dwell on a bunch of things that aren't possible any longer because we've come to this point. And so first of all, please, and all of the information I give you, it's not just for you. I really, really want you to spread the word to your friends, family and friends. We've got to just get as much information out as we can. So if you have a friend who hasn't registered to vote and says, oh, bummer, I missed it, I can't, that is not true in Illinois. You can register to vote when you vote, okay? So same day registration, you need 2 forms of ID. And first of all, I actually have up here, and you have all these URLs, so don't worry about all these web addresses. It doesn't hurt before you go vote, if you're voting in person, to check to make sure you're in the voter rolls. If you're not, if you don't find yourself, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not registered. You might have, it might have to do with an apartment number, a middle initial. It could mean a lot of things, but go ahead and just check it out. And if you don't find yourself in there, take the 2 forms of ID that you would need in order to do same day voter registration, okay? Just to be on the safe side. Anyway, you need 2 forms of registration for voter registration same day. You can do it at an early polling site, or you can do it at your local polling site for your precinct. And I'm not, you know, you can all use a student ID, that right there, you've got one. But the tricky one, the one I'm spending a little more time on today, is the second ID. You need an ID that has your current address on it. And that can be really difficult for young people because they don't necessarily get utilities. If you're living at home, there are a lot of things that you can't do. So if you don't have a driver's license and you don't have a state ID, which both have your address on them, here are some others. Do you have a lease? Maybe a dorm agreement? Do you have, is your auto insurance, do you have a card with your name on it because your auto insurance has an address? Are you any public assistance of any kind? You get a card for that. I don't know if you own a gun, but if you own a gun, that card works. Chicago, it's the city, city key card. That's good. That has your address on it. And then here's the one for you all to think about. It's an envelope. Something that's come through the mail, has your name on it. And it could be a bill, a transcript, or report card. So if you got a letter from Roosevelt University and it's still there, like if you've been here for a while and you've got some old report cards, they might still be in the envelope. Grab those, anything like that. But also a bank statement, pay stub, and some of these other sorts of things, okay? You get there and they don't like what you're saying to them, or you're registered or whatever. I'm just going to keep saying it. Don't walk away. Never walk away. Call 866-OUR-VOTE. That's the voter protection hotline. And it is good. And I'm going to keep saying it over and over again. Okay, real quick. Some of you, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's too late to get to request a mail-in ballot. But my fear is that some of you may be sitting on some mail-in ballots. So we're going to take a little time to talk about that. Drop boxes. It's too late to mail it. It isn't too late to mail it technically. Let's be honest, in Illinois, it's not too late to send it. It has to be postmarked by November 3rd, and it has to arrive by November 17th. But if you want your vote counted on election day, you don't want to put it in the mail. And and who knows what's really going on with the post office. We're getting so many different reports that maybe really a Dropbox is for you anyway. So at this point, a secure Dropbox is where you want to go. In chat, you'll find this URL that lists all of the secure Dropboxes. Now, every early voting site across the city, and that's the 50 wards, there's one in every ward, has a Dropbox for you to drop off your mail-in ballot. Also, the super site, which is downtown, it's at 191 North Clark. It has a 24-hour Dropbox. So you guys downtown, that's a good place to go. If you're out, late at night, you can drop that off. Until, as of today, before day's end, you can also drop your ballot off at a few public libraries, but they will not be available to you on election day. On election day, you can still drop it off at all of those 50 ward super election early polling places, but you can also drop it off at the United Center and both ballparks, Wrigley and what's its new name? The White Sox, they have a new name.
The guaranteed rate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
Everybody will always just call it Sox Park.
I think that's the best thing for me, Flores, actually. There and those, public transportation is set up to get to those. So I'm really excited that they've opened these places up. So those three places, the United Center and the two ballparks, are only available with Dropboxes on election day. So don't go there today. Let's keep going. Now, for you that are a little confused, up here I showed you this URL for checking whether you were registered. Well, when you put your address in, what it does is it pulls up something like this. These are your tabs, right? And this is check your voter registration. This is a sample ballot. You want to know which judges are going to be out of all those hundreds of judges, which ones am I going to see on my ballot? You can get your sample ballot in the same place. But I've got a screenshot here of my early vote. I did request a mail-in ballot and I received it. And if you could look here, you can see they got it way back in June. And they processed the application. Down here, September 24th, they mailed it to me. And then this was great. They received it and they've processed it. Okay. So if you haven't gotten your ballot yet and you asked for one, go here first to see what might be going on. If you mailed it and you're curious, go there just to check it out. I thought it was fun, actually. But what you don't want to do is a few things not to do. Don't take your mail-in ballot to your polling precinct. It is illegal for a judge to take your mail-in ballot. If you get to a polling precinct, your local polling place, and thinking that you've got your ballot, then you can just give it to them and have it, just surrender it, and they'll void it, and then you can just vote. That's one thing. Or you can head off to any of these other places, and there should be some nearby. The other thing is, if you haven't gotten your ballot, you change your mind, same thing. You just change your mind. You know what? I never voted before. I'm going to do it in person. I want to check out these machines. Then in that case, show up with your ballot, okay? And surrender it, and then you will get the little card and be able to go vote just the way you want. But one last thing is, if you never got your ballot and you asked for it, now you're in a bit of a pickle because you don't have anything to surrender. Go ahead, they'll give you something. It'll be an affidavit that you just signed saying you never got it. You will then be able to vote provisionally. It won't be counted that election day, but when your ballot never comes back in, it'll come through, and so vote provisionally. If you get a bunch of noise, what do? You call election protection, our vote. All right, don't leave without voting. Just never, ever leave without voting. Just make that phone call. Okay, real quick, in-person voting. Do you need an ID? Take one along just in case, but no, they match signatures, okay? Take one along just in case. My signature was just garbage, so I always had my ID, and you know, my signature, my voter registration looked like a second grader did it, and my actual signature looks like I'm some sort of a doctor now, scribbling everywhere. So I always had my ID in my back pocket just in case. Now, you still have time today to early vote. They are open until 7 p.m. So as soon as you get through this wonderful series that Roosevelt is putting on today, you can head on over and vote, all right? Election day, you can vote again. Now, I'm going to give you some information that nobody really knows. This is the fun part of getting someone connected with the League of Women Voters, because we're in constant conversations with the Board of Elections. In the past, you could not vote at early voting sites on election day. It was only for polling places, but they have opened them up. So I want you to tell your grandma, I want you to tell maybe your aged, you know, aunt and uncle, tell them if they missed their early, all the things they wanted to do, tell them to go to an early voting site, because I can guarantee nobody's going to be there. It's probably one of the safest places to vote. So the lines are going to be shorter there because nobody knows about it. All right. So it's a good little secret, especially for people who might be at risk, but still want to make the trip out in order to vote. You're going to find all of these web addresses in the chat that you can click through and find what is specific to you. Again, I was going to talk about, I'm going to just keep this moving. Let's just keep this moving because there's some fun stuff. Researching the ballot. This is important. The ballot is long. The ballot is long mostly because there are so many judges. So you're going to vote for president, you know, you're going to vote for Senate, you're going to vote for your House. Those are all the federal positions that will be on this ballot. You'll be voting for a state rep. You might be voting for a state senator. You'll be voting for some local things like the Cook County State's Attorney race is an interesting race this time around. There are people who are going to be on the board of the water reclamation. All of that. What is all that stuff? Well, for judges, here's a couple of sites that you can go to. Again, the URLs are going to be in chat, but I'm going to be showing you the Illinois voter guide that the League of Women Voters puts out, because it's really one-stop shopping. I just love it. And just before I leave this, I want to just, while I'm leaving this, I'll just talk. I need to start over. I'm going to go to a website real quick. This should be it. Oh, you know what? Let me go home here. I just real quick before I show you a few. This is the Board of Elections site. So don't worry about anything. You don't just go to this address and you can find out all these things, because you guys are capable of clicking through and finding things. It's also where you can get some election results. Okay. But what I really want to show you is this other. But before I go to this, I'm going to click through the Illinois Voter Guide. I just want to talk about election results this evening. Don't expect there to be a resolution in every state as to who has won, any of the races, obviously president and Senate, but all of even down ballot races. Some will come in early. Illinois is one of the really good ones because every single mail-in ballot that comes in, they check the signatures, they process it, they send it through. They don't know what the totals are. The totals, it's all sitting there. And as soon as the polls close, they flip a switch and they send those results out to the precincts. So we aren't going to be one of those states that has to go through all of our mail-in ballots, okay? Another one that doesn't is Florida. But Florida is always so close that it's almost not where it just sort of cancels out how fast the things come in. North Carolina will be an interesting to watch. Unfortunately, one of the last to come in terms of how they process will be Pennsylvania, which everyone's anxious to see. And this, you know, there are 4 categories. We're in the second fastest. Florida's in the first fastest. Pennsylvania's in the least fast. And unfortunately, Michigan and Wisconsin are next to in the third least fast way of finding out. But it'll be interesting. Just chill though, and tell everyone to chill. It'll be okay. We do this all the time. All right, so I want to show you the Illinois voter guide just quickly, and then I'm gonna pass it off to Bethany because I want to make sure we hear everything she's got to say. So you can do a lot of things here. I brought it here for you to they changed the homepage. I'm sorry, you guys. Just go straight here to put your address in. All right. I'm going to go ahead and put my address in. I thought it was. Okay. Put your address in, and this will now pull up English. There's other languages. Pull up an exact copy of my ballot. You can get that from the Board of Elections, but this is a better way to do it. Because, especially for first-time voters, research your ballot, okay? Did you see it? I just clicked through that really quickly. Sorry about that, guys. And it gives you a lot of information, but over here, it lets you know who's on your ballot. It has links to nonpartisan information on all of the candidates. So this is my ballot. And you know what, my local races are, down here, Metropolitan Water Reclamation District Board. You can click on that. And I'm going to use this as an example because it not only do you get information, but you also find out what the heck it is. What is the water reclamation? A lot of people don't know, right? And here's the best thing. So you can go through, research that, and you can vote as you can just start voting. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I have to do it this way. I haven't done this for a while. Add to my ballot right there. Click on someone and add this person to your ballot, okay? And I'm not going to, you know what? No, I don't want to. You don't have to. You can send them and then they'll send you, they can email you your ballot directly. But here's what you can do. You go through this and you can figure this all out. And then when you're done, you can print it, email it to yourself and take it with you if you want. But the reason I'm spending a little more time on this than you would think is because look at, these are the vacancy judges. You can go through here and you can go down here and find out what the 13 Illinois Bar Associations think of them. And it's all in one place. You can get that at some other places, but I think it's really nice that it's all here consolidated. Then you get down here and this crowd you do yes or no on. Those were vacancies. And you can see here that, all right, she did pretty well, okay? And you can go through. What I do if you're gonna be voting in person is I go through, mark them all, and then I go and I have a cheat sheet of the ones I wanna say no on. And just have that little cheat sheet because this is alphabetical order. It's not going to be on your ballot. So I go through and I mark my no's and then I put in my yeses. And of course, what's really good, we have on this ballot, probably one of the most important things for people in Illinois is the measures, the amendment. And I wish I could tell you more about it, but I've run out of time. And this is the proposed amendment, and this is whether or not we want a graduated income tax, graduated state income tax, as opposed to a flat tax. Go here, click on this, and you can read pro and con, and you will not get fake con on this. This will weed out some of the crazy stuff that's been floating around And these public questions are just for the municipal, and they are advisory. It's really just a survey, taking the pulse of the city to see how they feel about things. Okay, that's pretty much what I wanted. If there's
excellent.
I got some fun slides on voter women's rights and voting, but I think we need to
So
hear.
Bethany, can you tell me why it's important that women vote and what happens when women vote? And when
Yeah,
we don't?
absolutely.
Take it away.
Absolutely. And I really want to thank Catherine for all that wonderful information, especially around how to sort through the judges, because I'm sure I'm not the only person whose mail-in ballot sat for like a good week until I had time to actually go online to research who I wanted to say no to. So it's very, very helpful to have that. I wanted to give a huge thanks to Director Thompson-Hill and Professor Downey for organizing and moderating this respectively, and all of the events going on today. Pamela, I know you put a ton of work into those, and thank you. This stuff could not be more important. So there was a few things that I was asked to maybe share a little bit about, including consequences of what happens when women turn out to vote, and then on the other hand, the negative consequences of when they don't. And then maybe if we have time, a little bit on like specific groups of women. And I'll try and talk about this a little bit on the way, right? Women are not monolithic, and even, like white women or African-American women are not monoliths. And so I want to talk maybe a little bit about sort of breaking that down, and the importance of having people that actually represent us, which is kind of the subtext of all this. So what are the consequences of women turning out to, oh yes, kudos to Megan, absolutely, thank you, Megan. So women vote at actually higher rates than men since 2004. So in the last election, more than 10 million more women than men voted in each election cycle, which is pretty profound when you think about the fact that we're only a country of 350 odd million people. So women do vote differently in many ways. So they don't only turn out more, but they do vote differently in some certain ways. And that's one of the many kind of gender gaps that we talk about in politics and voting. There's a lot of different ways that phrase is actually used. So some of the most important ways that women tend to, and again, making a broad generalization here, tend to vote differently from men is that they do tend to be more likely to vote for the Democratic candidate in any given race and less likely to vote for the Republican candidate. So in close races, this can make a really big difference on outcome. Now, we've had sort of fewer close races, sort of gradually over time in American politics, but there's still a lot of close ones, and women can absolutely be the deciding factor in those. Besides turning out at different rates than men, women actually do prioritize some things kind of differently. So, or maybe a better way to say that is that women often will say that they prioritize the same issue areas, but they interpret those very differently. So for example, both genders, and probably any of you who think about politics ever will not be surprised by this, both genders will generally say that their number one issue area, more commonly than any others, is listed as being the economy. But what that means looks very different. So women, of course, are more income insecure and more unemployment insecure. They, generally speaking, have less saved for retirement, and they live longer. So they're more likely to see themselves, or to be able to envision themselves as potentially needing a social safety net, whether it's Social Security or Medicare or family leave or unemployment insurance. So because women can, even if they're not actively using them, they can imagine themselves needing them. They are likely to support the party that supports that social safety net. And of course, women are more vulnerable, generally speaking, because of systemic problems and systemic bias. So men also, as I said, tend to prioritize the economy, or respond that their top priority is the economy when they're polled. But they might vote more around things like taxation and what's actually coming home in their paychecks. So this is, of course, going to potentially lead them to, in fact, support Republican candidates more than Democratic ones, because those are going to be more likely to be a kind of traditional Republican set of values. So women, of course, do, I think it's really important to see the subtleties here though, because women do of course worry about taxation and what they're bringing home too, because they are, despite the fact that we have many policies in place that still assume that they're not, they are often the primary or only breadwinners as well, but they also get paid much less than men still for the same work. And so again, even if they are the primary breadwinner, they're very likely to see the value of those social services and social support networks that have been in place since the New Deal, especially. Sorry, the phone, my landline never rings and now it's ringing, of course. So women also often tend to see the economy in more holistic ways and to even think about things like healthcare as being part of their economic concerns. So what they are thinking about when they respond, yeah, the economy is my top priority, may look a little different. At least that's what polls seem to suggest. So they can envision, for instance, like what would happen if someone, not that men can't, but women are very likely to think about what would happen if someone in my family encountered a catastrophic health crisis, of course, something that Professor Downey thinks and talks about all the time. And so they will tend to understand in a way that seems to be a little bit more at the top of their thinking, the importance of government intervention in healthcare and other economic support systems. And even if they, again, are not using those actively, they can imagine themselves needing it in the future, and they can imagine other people needing them in a way that's very empathetic. So they tend to bring that empathy into their political decisions as well. So men and women, I guess to summarize, often tend to look at the economy and government differently because women might have a different relationship to government and may see themselves as potentially needing government more, again, largely because of systemic bias, whereas women are more likely than women, polling tells us, to think about kind of how you can cut government. And clearly government providing support that's reliable for all folks is more of a democratic value, while keeping government small would be more of a Republican one. So in a way, it's very much about who needs government and why. And so this is kind of, I think, a big takeaway for thinking about this and thinking about why different groups may vote differently, is it sometimes comes down to these really kind of big questions about, like, what is government for? So if we think that who needs government and why kind of tends to bring to mind ideas of workplace protections or the importance of social programs, there are many layers that may make women more likely to be aware of how they would need a government to protect them, again, because of many systemic imbalances. So what's kind of interesting is that if we think about these big philosophical questions, that actually might help us understand a little bit about the role of COVID in the current political moment and how it may have crystallized thinking for many people around understanding that there are some things, many things, that the private sector really can't do, and what the government's role really can and should be, and the consequences of when that role is not fulfilled. So generally this, we think, has likely moved some independent and swing voters a bit more toward a vision of government that might align more with the Democrats, at least in the current moment, in just being a bit more interventionist in public health, if not in other areas. So I'll just talk a little bit about sort of maybe the importance of not overgeneralizing too much about men versus women, or thinking of women as a monolith. And then I'm assuming we want to leave some time for Q&A, so I don't want to take too much time, but to just kind of think about like how we disentangle this notion of like the women's vote a little bit. So white women who are married, not college educated, maybe not the primary breadwinner in many cases, tend to vote Republican more frequently, or have traditionally tended to vote Republican more frequently. And that's a group that's often referred to as like white suburban women. That's a term that's used a lot, although in most of the surveys and polling that's done, we don't actually ask where people live, but for some reason that's called like the white suburban female vote. They've been much more traditional kind of Republican voters. There's another group that has voted Republican traditionally, but that has been turning into a swing bloc. And that is, again, a group that's very similar in being white women, college educated, white women that are married, but are college educated. If they are college educated, they have tended to be lately becoming a bit more of a swing vote, which again has been courted by both of the major parties. So Hillary Clinton did actually win that vote and did better than a Democrat has done with that demographic for any time in the last 20 years. So that's increasingly being seen as a group that's very much in play. white unmarried women are more likely to be Democrat voters. And that may very well be because of that exact sensitivity to the need for government to provide a social safety net that we were just talking about. So again, a lot of this really comes down to economic vulnerability. And again, it's not that women are always using these programs, but they understand that others do. Both parties are really going after, especially that second white female demographic that I talked about in this election. So what are the consequences of what happened? And well, actually, since we've started talking about the different groups of white women, instead of talking about what goes wrong when women are not included, let's talk maybe a little bit about kind of the impact of women of color. So women of color, especially African-American women, have been considered the backbone of the Democratic Party for years, for decades, actually. And in fact, that exact phrase, if you Google anything on like African-American women's political participation, that term backbone of the Democratic Party gets used consistently. And I think what a lot of people fear is that that can mean that that vote has been taken for granted at times. But regardless, that has been an incredibly consistent voting bloc. And so we could talk maybe a little bit about why. Overall, many observers really do believe that Biden is the nominee because he was so successful with African-American voters generally, because of economic, but also social issues, and kind of this longstanding alignment with the Democratic Party that goes back to even things like the Voting Rights Act and desegregation of schools, et cetera. So, as I said, African-American women tend to be very consistent voters. They're more consistent than men, both in voting and doing work for the party. And what I mean is in terms of both their turnout and in terms of kind of how consistently they vote Democratic. So African-American women currently in current polling have been split about 93% for Biden and about 5% for Trump. Men are a little less consistent with about 85% polling for Biden and about 12% for Trump. But African-American women also vote more than Black men do, and that is actually a split that's larger amongst the African-American population than any other group. So the turnout in the 2016 election for African-American women was 64%. For African-American men, it was 54%. And that's the biggest gender gap in terms of turnout of any racial or ethnic group. So kind of a couple of really interesting gaps there. And if we have more time or maybe in Q&A, we could talk a little bit about maybe why that is. Although I think we have a lot of different potential answers for that. In terms of Latinx voters and Latino voters specifically, it's really exciting. There's a huge demographic shift that's currently happening in the Latinx community. So a lot of them are coming of age this year for the first time. In fact, there's a record number of Latinx folks that are turning 18, and that's likely to be the case for the next several election cycles. So this is a group that is becoming increasingly important and doing so at a very rapid rate. So Latinos are the nation's largest share of non-white voters, a record 32 million. Latinos make up all 13% of all eligible voters, and their youth is just really astounding. So I think this is something, in thinking about how to make it clear to students that their vote is important if they need convincing, is that about 40% of all eligible Latinx voters are 18 to 35, according to census data. And that means that that particular demographic, right, like young Latinx voters, have a huge potential to influence this and increasingly future elections. It is also the racial and ethnic group with the largest number of eligible voters that are under 30, and the youngest racial or ethnic group in the country with a median age of 30. So that's kind of astounding when you think of it. 1 million Latinx folks are expected to turn 18 for every year for the next 2 decades. And very soon, Hispanic Americans are going to surpass African Americans as the largest racial or ethnic minority voting group. So that's an incredibly important and also not very monolithic group, but they're very much linked to the youth vote, which I think is really, really important to understand. And I think, just to put in perspective the importance of young people's votes for a second is, kind of to understanding like how large the potential of the youth vote is. for the first time this year, Americans that were born after the 9/11 attacks are going to be able to vote. So like they have this very different, in some ways, perspective on America's role in the world. They don't have any recollection of that really huge cleavage in our national consciousness. Generation Z will surpass the silent generation share of the electorate for the first time this year. And what's really exciting, I think, in terms of mobilizing all these potential voters is thinking about how much more representative our candidates for office have actually become, right? So we have more and more young candidates, and people are generally more motivated to vote if there are more people that they can identify with running. So again, there's much more to talk about with that, but I want to just, as my last point, just to make sure that we have a little bit of time for more discussion, just to say a little tiny bit about the potential damage that can be done when women's votes are suppressed. So as most people know, we just passed the 100th anniversary in August of the right for women to vote, which is a very short time when you think about it in the US. And of course, even then, that was really still not including all women when we think about it practically in terms of actual access to suffrage. But it's also something that is not even a done deal today, because when you think about attempts at voter suppression, which have become pretty substantial in the last few election cycles, they disproportionately impact not only people of color, but women specifically. So voter photo ID laws, which are one of the most common forms of attempts at voter suppression, are particularly costly and burdensome for women, in part because roughly 90% of women change their legal name upon marriage or divorce. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, about 11% of eligible voters don't have a government-issued photo ID of the kind that Catherine was talking about, and only 48% of voting age women have a birth certificate that accurately reflects their current name, and you often need that certificate to get other IDs actually issued. And if we look at states around the world where women have been systematically excluded from the vote, especially a lot of post-conflict states where they have been often written out of new constitutions, we have seen that the places where that's happened have had shorter-lived peace agreements, have had less stable democracies, and have had less success with actually keeping a stable state together at all. So there's a lot of reasons to believe that when we exclude the concerns that women might be more attuned to, as we were talking about a few minutes ago, that you're going to have a nation state that does not actually serve the people that it is supposed to be. That's kind of the whole raison d'etre for them existing in the first place. And so when we exclude those people from the way that we construct our state processes and institutions, we shouldn't be surprised that we end up with failed states. So there's other things that we could talk about, of course, but I want to stop there in case there's other points of discussion that the organizers wanted us to get into, or if there's questions and answers.
You know, I want to make a point about what Bethany has said, that we're also seeing now since more and more women are getting elected, we're seeing successful platforms being held, right? So like Biden wasn't about for green energy. AOC and the group I referred to of people that got elected in 2018 were able to move that needle. So now it's something that he talks about, right? So younger people with different lived experiences can impact both parties if the parties will let them. Also, during COVID, we've seen the most successful response to COVID has been female leaders who are listening to their electorate. They're being honest with them. They have a different source and a way of communicating hard things people have to do, and they've been incredibly successful. So if we want democracies to work, we need more women to be part of it. And we also need more voices. So not just the same women, right?
Yes.
So, and women care about the collective usually versus men that might care about the individual concerns that they have. So by those things, we're going to get different outcomes. But if we don't get more people running,
yes,
better outcomes.
Bethany, can I just add on, like, one that's such a good point and so important, and one of the things that I really didn't have time to talk about was this really hopeful thing that's happened, where not only have more women been running, and in the last election cycle it was more Democratic women, but it's been more Republican women as well in record numbers, but it's also women that are unapologetic about being women and about saying, I have these concerns based on my positionality as a woman. And for a very long time, women were told to not talk about their family roles, not talk about their concerns. to try to seem older and tougher than they actually were, because that was how they thought they could appeal. And you see women now that are running and being unapologetic about the fact that they're young, that they have families, that they have student debt. And that is making them more authentically connected to their potential constituency. So I think that's what you said is just so important on that front.
And they're not dressing all the same, as we've seen with Kamala. They're dressing and AOC and Presley, who again, these are all new players. Their background is not lawyered that trajectory up. So I want to really stress that when all of our students are out there voting, and our staff and our faculty, think about putting your name on that ballot. These people they were not in with the party, and they went out there, they didn't like what happened. And again, democracy is, you can course correct, but you got to be part of the process, and voting is the first step, but you can do more. And I'm sure Catherine's seen a lot more women who are coming and saying, how do I get elected? How do I get started, right?
Yeah, I mean, I did want to make one observation. My favorite image that really just backs up exactly what Bethany is saying is when Speaker Pelosi regained the speakership. I loved that she was mobbed by her grandchildren and everyone. That in years gone by, all of that she would have been, with her gavel, but it's like, no, she's a woman and she's in power. It was a beautiful moment, I thought, actually. But it's true. You're absolutely right. And I think that we need to think about, there are lots of organizations that are pushing women to run. You can find them, they're great. But we also need to make sure that we keep our eyes on what's happening to voting rights right now. It just, the League of Women Voters, we were formed out of the suffrage movement, and we moved, I think it was like the week of, even before it was ratified, the League of Women Voters was formed to educate. And you would think after 100 years, we wouldn't be having to do all of the same things again. But the latest really problematic one is the Supreme Court decision of Shelby County versus Holder. And in that, we took the beauty of the Voting Rights Act from 1965 was that it outlawed all of these things, all of these horrible Jim Crow things. But what it did is states that had a record of doing this had to pre-clear any new voting law with the federal government. And it would be shocked. The Voting Rights Act was gutted with that one decision, removing all the pre-clearance, because you all have been around long enough now to see all of the court cases. This is one, what was it? Is it North Carolina that had a law and the Supreme Court said it was precision, or was it? Oh, I've lost my thought. It was like a precision.
Well, I think that what Kavanaugh was saying that it would make it really unclear, like how many people had voted after election day because of how late they were going to allow them to be counted.
Well, that's even more incredible that you have justice that's
not how it works.
Political.
He was also cited Vermont's law, and he was wrong, and he had to course correct it publicly too. But you've also seen people like Stacey Abrams, again, who didn't win, and then she started a group that knows what's going on, and we're trying to take all these cases to court to prove that they're unconstitutional. So again, women are even about changing the laws that have been gutted and voter suppression. So we're on the forefront of everything. We really are. And it's not because you get what you want. It's because you didn't get what you want. And you're like, nope, in a democracy, that means you power up, right? How can our students become more involved? I mean, Catherine said great things about how they vote. We understand the gender differences from Bethany. I've given lots of examples, but how do we empower people to vote? And not just once, because I mean, this is like you got to do it every time. Democracy is an ongoing game, right? So how do we get people to empower themselves and their families and bring more people to the table so we get more representative democracy and democracy that people want to be part of? Either one of you, go.
I think that one way to keep young people involved is if you can connect them to local politics in some way. It's shocking how few people actually vote for mayor or or their alderman. But really, that's what's touching their lives more than just about anything. I mean, and if you can connect them, if you can get connected to something local, I think that it feeds because you see what happens. You see that, that you are able to, go to City Hall and speak up. I really think when we over concentrate on the White House, we lose everybody, even for midterm elections. And if we could just show how important these lower ballot races are and help people get connected with their aldermen, doing different things. These are great resume builders too. If you can be on a local government board that is part of your neighborhood and it meets once a month, they're just dying to have young people represented on that board with all the old stiffs that are there. And it's a fantastic resume item for young people as well. There's a lot
What
of
do you
that.
think, Bethany? What could we do to get more of our students involved? Because we represent the surge of demographics and gender that's right there prime. So what can we do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I was trying to sort of speak to that when I was pointing out the fact that, if women too, but if students understand like how important the youth vote is and how big it is in some of those demographics that I was referring to, that I think that feeling that they are not necessarily going to just continue to be unheard, which unfortunately there's structural stuff that needs to change in our system so that people are heard with greater equity, but that just understanding how big the youth vote is and how differently it votes, meaning it can really change things, because we're not going to have like so much of some of the outdated policies in this country are really about kind of what generations have been in control and how large those generations have been as voting blocks and how consistent they've been. So understanding that the youth vote is really kind of surging in many ways as a demographic force just gives people a bit more motivation. But I really do want to second the getting involved in local things, because A, it does impact you. B, you can have a much greater role because so many fewer people are going to be a part of any one campaign, whether that's an issue campaign or an electoral campaign. And I'm sure that Professor Downey and I both have many students who are incredibly active and amazing organizers already. Like, I wish I'd had half of their organizing chutzpah when I was their age. And they're doing so much great stuff already, and they're doing it on the local level, and they're connecting with people that show them how issue politics locally are connected to who you elect and what pressure you put on people as part of that electoral cycle.
Exactly. I also think fighting for voting rights will keep young people voting, keeping track of, but also the actual just ability to vote. For example, we started with the Shriver Center, and then Chicago Votes took over the organization of it, which was perfect. And that is getting people into Cook County Jail and helping and making sure that the detainees there actually were able to register to vote. And that got started. And I'm down at U of C, and we have like student affiliates for League of Women Voters, and just the students were dying to get in there to do that and help. And at the same time that was happening, we also worked on legislation to make it a law that county clerks and sheriffs must provide voting for their detainees, and we got that passed, and it was great. Cook County Jail, Cook County has more than 3 million people, so they must bring in voting machines, and it's fantastic because when you got voting machines there and you got voting judges, you can do same-day registration. So and
thank you, Catherine. I think we're over for our time, but I want to thank you and Bethany for giving us great information and great examples and for inspiring people. Certainly everybody can reach out to any of us. Our numbers and information will be in the chat. But this was wonderful and inspiring, and I appreciate all this. And now everybody go vote, 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 vote. Yes, thank you so much. Thanks to the organizers too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.